An arrest has been made in a 25-year-old Agawam murder case. 22 News reporter Matt Karen was in the Hampden County Courthouse where the district attorney identified the suspect arrested in the rape and murder of Lisa Ziegert.
When a 24-year-old woman who worked the night shift disappeared from her workplace, the police and her family feared the worst after blood traces and evidence of struggle were found at her work premises. After an extensive search a few days later, their fears were confirmed when her dead body was found 5 kilometers away from her workplace. All efforts to apprehend her killer proved abortive for decades. Finally, after 25 years, her loved ones now have answers as to what happened to Lisa Ziegert. Hello and welcome to Mystery Detective. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more crime cases. This case takes us to Agawam, Massachusetts. Agawam, Massachusetts is a small town near the western Connecticut border. The city is most notable for the Six Flags amusement park. The park is the biggest mime park in New England. It has a wave pool, numerous water slides, and 8 roller coasters. Agawam additional attraction is the Robinson State Park, a day-use park with biking trails, fishing ponds, walking paths, kayaking, and cross-country skiing. Typical industries in the city of Agawam include construction, manufacturing, and retail. Residents in Agawam could not be more happy for its convenience. The majority of those who work for a living in the city commute for 25 minutes or less to their workplace. There are 3 elementary schools in Agawam, in which one of them include the Agawam High School, where there is a memorial to one of the town's most beloved teachers, Lisa Ziegert, whose untimely death changed the city of Agawam forever. Lisa Marie Ziegert was born on the 24th of March, 1968 in Holyoke, Massachusetts, to George and Diane Ziegert. Lisa grew up in a loving, tight-knit family. She had 3 other siblings named Sharon, David, and Lynn. Lisa and her family were residents of Agawam. While growing up, Lisa had developed a passion for music, which made her learn several musical instruments. In fact, at some point in her life, she joined the school musical groups. After high school, Lisa Ziegert attended Westfield State University, where she studied education and ultimately obtained a teaching degree in the year 1990. She worked as an intern for some time, during which she worked several shifts as a counselor at a kids' camp. Lisa loved teaching. She took her profession seriously and was active at it in every way. She had also taught Sunday school at her church. After her internship was over, at the age of 24, Lisa accepted a position as a teacher's assistant at Agawam High School, where she had previously attended as a teenager. There, she worked primarily with a group of kids that had special needs. Lisa had a greater understanding of her students than any other instructor. She was also very professional and worked hard to ensure that every one of her students received the best education possible. Lisa was a very special person. With the kids, she always had a special rapport. They knew that she really liked them and that she treated them like people, Lisa's mom said. In the evenings, after the shift at school was over, Lisa also had a part-time job at the neighborhood Brittany card and gift shop. One fateful Wednesday afternoon, on September 15, 1992, was typical for Lisa Ziegert. She had concluded her shift at the school. She left the school building around 4:30 p.m. and drove directly to the card and gift store, where she worked weekdays from 5 to 9 p.m. Her sister, Lynn, briefly dropped by around 5:30 p.m. to keep her company, because Lisa would always complain to her family about how bored, lonely, and scared she feels while at the shop at night. According to Lynn, during her visit to the store, there was no sign of Lisa being in a bad mood. She said her sister was cheerful the whole time that evening, and nothing seemed off. It was easy talk. It was sister talk. It was a little after 6 p.m. when I left. And then I went home and she was fine. She was fine when I left, Lynn said. By the following morning at 8:45 a.m., Sophia Maynard arrived at the card and gift store as usual to open up the store. She was supposed to start working at 9 o'clock. She was shocked to see Lisa's car in the parking lot because she worked at the school in the mornings, so she was not supposed to be in the store when classes were on. Sophia noticed that a light was on inside the store and the door's open sign was visible. At that point, Sophia thought that Lisa might have missed the school morning shift because of the incoming Easter celebration. She and Lisa intended to stuff some balloons for sale during that holiday. When Sophia entered the store, she called Lisa's name multiple times, but she got no answer. I called her name a couple of times and I figured she'd just pop her head out. She didn't. I came behind the counter. All of her things were there, her drawings, her pocketbook, her car keys. And then I just kind of freaked out, Sophia said. Everything looked strange to Sophia. She felt something was not right. She immediately dashed out the store and ran across the street to a restaurant there and then asked them to call the police. As soon as the police got there, they started inspecting the store. The front of the building appeared to be normal, but the back had a creepy opening. Approaching the storeroom at the back, officers discovered numerous shattered bags that had bloodstains on them. They also discovered a number of cards that were scattered across the floor and covered in blood as well. All these indicated a sign of struggle between Lisa Ziegert and her attacker. Additionally, they discovered some tiny dirt by the door that they believed might have been from a shoe trail. Despite all of these evidence, the investigators were unable to locate a useful lead within the store. That morning, Lisa unusually failed to show up at school. The principal called her mother to check if everything was okay with her, but Diane Ziegert had no idea where her daughter was. Her news of disappearance traveled the town of Agawam, and within hours, all of her friends, family, and acquaintances began to do all they can to bring Lisa back home. The police initial strategy to the case was to develop a robbery theory, but that theory was quickly abandoned when they discovered that the perpetrator had not accessed Lisa's wallet or cash register. The goods in the store were also not missing. The second approach the detectives took in the case was to retrace the timeline of what happened the previous evening. They discovered that Lisa's sister had left the shop around 6 o'clock. They also spoke to store owners and neighbors around the card and gift store. It was discovered that Lisa had a conversation with the owner of the carpet shop next door at around 7:20 p.m. They both talked about a critical issue with their local parking lot, which was being used by patrons of the bowling alley. The shop owner then informed her that he would not take the chance of publicly criticizing the drivers who had parked in front of their stores. He claimed that many of them were crazy and dangerous. After about 15 minutes of conversation with Lisa, he left to go home. Police went through the cash register and discovered that the most recent time money had been deposited was 8:20 p.m. Investigators also located a woman who entered the store at about 9 p.m. She said the store's door was opened, but nobody came out to attend to her, so she left. Before taking her leave, she claimed to have heard noises coming from the back room. She said it was a banging noise, but she didn't think much of it and decided to leave. The police were able to determine the general time frame of Lisa's disappearance. She finished attending to her last customer at 8:20 p.m., and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were then left with the questions of what had happened to Lisa Ziegert within those 40 minutes. On the day Lisa was discovered missing, the local police, together with the FBI and the Massachusetts State Police, carried out a massive search for her. The search party on foot explored the vicinity of the store while the helicopters searched farther, off areas. Additionally, police dogs were brought to the store area in an effort to follow Lisa's track. Sadly, none of these produced any favorable outcomes. On 17th of April, 1992, the head of the local police department announced that the case had been reclassified from a missing person case to a kidnapping case. This was done because investigators were confident that Lisa had not left the store of her own free will. 2 days after she vanished, the police were already looking into a kidnapping case. On Easter Sunday, April 19th, all the nearby churches prayed for Lisa Ziegert to be found alive and unharmed. Even though it was Easter, there was no sense of celebration. Around 2 p.m. that same day, a call was made to the police. On the outskirts of the town, close to Route 75, a man was walking his dog. He spotted a woman's body while walking through the wooded area. He immediately alerted the police afterwards. When police arrived, they identified the woman to be Lisa Ziegert. They discovered numerous stab wounds on her neck and legs, which she had sustained from a sharp object. Medical professionals then came to the conclusion that Lisa had also been sexually assaulted. Investigators were able to determine that Lisa's body was dumped 5 kilometers away from the store, which indicated that the offender most likely drove her there in a vehicle. In order to protect any potential evidence, detectives promptly blocked off the area and moved in a single line. At the time, it was raining, and the muddy road was covered in tire tracks. Sadly, the cops were unable to locate the murder weapon or any other concrete proof. The sad news that Lisa Ziegert had been brutally murdered by an unidentified killer immediately went around the city of Agawam, the church where she taught Sunday school on Sundays. In her honor, organized a farewell service. Around 1,000 people attended the service. People said good things about her. Lisa was loved, and the news of her premature demise made residents of the small community of Agawam, who were used to living in peace and safety, experience a mood that was almost panic. Many store owners canceled single shifts, and employees escorted one another to their cars at night. Within a matter of days, the self-defense instructors had a lot of students coming in for classes. Also, roughly 300 women filed for a license to possess a gun. The entire community was terrified that an unidentified criminal would attack one of them again. Amidst all these, the FBI and the police were fervently working on the case nonstop. It soon became public knowledge that they had obtained a DNA sample from the crime scene. The DNA sample might have belonged to the murderer. The investigators at some point brought Lisa's boyfriend in for questioning since they suspected him. He, however, had an alibi, and the DNA sample from the crime scene did not match his DNA. Additionally, DNA testing was done on Lisa's friends, co-workers, and relatives. And again, no matches were found. Numerous tips were sent to the police by locals. On the night of Lisa's murder, there were several reports of a strange car. Others claimed to know the offender's identity, but detectives weeded out all of these leads since they were dead ends. The police concluded that a van or large SUV had left the tire tracks on the road close to where the body was discovered. Despite not getting any closer to apprehending the offender after questioning all drivers of similar vehicles, detectives were able to track down a witness who might have seen a similar vehicle that night. At around 9:15 p.m. that night, a worker from a store close by was on her way home. She was at a traffic light when she noticed a sizable SUV pulling off the road and driving in the direction of the spot where Lisa's body would eventually be discovered. Since it was dark outside, the woman was unable to provide more specific details about the car. She merely mentioned that she thought the car included a man and a woman. She also mentioned the peculiar fact that the woman's head was oddly jerking, as if she were dozing off or unconscious when the car pulled into the gravel road. Unfortunately, the information did not help in identifying the suspect. Since then, all leads have been exhausted. Police kept working on the case, but as each month went by, the likelihood of cracking this mysterious case diminished. Before Lisa's family and friends were given another opportunity to learn the truth, an additional year and a half had gone. National television aired an episode about the case in October 1993. The well-liked program featured unresolved case stories that received a ton of attention. This occasionally brought fresh witnesses to the police attention, giving the case new life. Lisa's case was not different. The police received 700 calls from callers with some kind of information within an hour of the broadcast. Most of these leads, as usual, went nowhere, though all of them were looked into by the police. The cops claimed to have found a few worthwhile leads, but they did not say which one. Sadly, it also had little effect. the likelihood of cracking the case significantly decreased with time. The family of Lisa went to tremendous lengths to make sure her legacy was preserved and not forgotten. Despite the early end to Lisa's teaching career, her family had a significant impact on the Agawam's educational system. 3 years after Lisa's murder, in 1995, her parents donated $11,000 specifically to the school's science department where Lisa worked. These donations were used to support genetics classes and to purchase equipments. Additionally, her parents established a fund for special needs students, which gave them around $35,000 in scholarships. 2002 made it 10 years since Lisa was killed. Still, her mother, Dee Ziegert, held out hope that the case will eventually be solved. She made considerable efforts to preserve her daughter's memories. She partook in every interview and responded to every question from the media. Each year, she assembled a sizable crowd to light candles in Lisa's memory. In the same period, investigators were fervently working on Lisa Ziegert'S case. They only possessed one key piece of evidence at the time, a DNA sample from the alleged murderer. They continued to cross-check the DNA sample against databases of known criminals in the hopes that the actual suspect would eventually show up, but months turned into years, and the killer would not be found. 24 years after Lisa was savagely murdered, on September 24, 2016, investigators made the decision to take a different approach to the case. They then opted for DNA phenotyping. The basic idea behind it is that specialists can determine a person's supposed portrait and physical characteristics from the data contained in their DNA. For example, with the use of DNA, experts can determine a person's gender, their approximate age, eye color, and hair color. Although the portrait created using this data may not always be correct, but occasionally, the coincidence of the portrait matching the face of the real suspect is remarkable. Based on the DNA sample of Lisa's murderer, investigators were able to produce 2 portraits of the culprit, one at age 25 and the other at age 50. After the photos were released to the public, more than 170 calls were made to the police department. People who made these calls claimed to have seen a similar man. However, the majority of these leads were fruitless. On the 18th of September, 2017, just a year later, police made an unexpected prominent announcement. The offender had been taken into custody. He was identified as Gary Shara, a 49-year-old man. The news of his arrest immediately spread like wildfire throughout the media. Rarely do the police catch the murderer 25 years after the crime was committed. As a result, such stories immediately garner a lot of public interest. The moment Gary Shara was taken into custody, the detectives made public how they had located him. It was discovered that Gary was listed as a suspect in 1993, the year after Lisa was killed. Do you remember that federal television program that resulted in thousands of phone calls with leads for the police? Well, it happened that a Seattle lawyer was one of those callers. At the time, he informed the police that his client might know something about Lisa's death. His client was a woman who was divorcing her spouse at the time. They were residents of Long Meadow, a community close to Agawam. The woman claimed that her husband was displaying more attention to Lisa Ziegert'S case at the time. She claimed anytime Lisa Ziegert'S murder case was being broadcasted on television, her husband would storm into the room and vacantly stare at the television screen, completely oblivious to everyone around him. Her husband, as you may have guessed, was Gary Shara. At the time of Lisa's murder, he was 24 years old and was married with a 1-year-old son. Gary Shara and his wife were always arguing and getting into fights, and soon after the birth of their son, they had already started their divorce process. In 1993, according to the police statement, investigators had already developed the notion that Gary was involved in Lisa's murder, but they couldn't find any proof to back it up. Also, his ex-wife, who provided the information, made the police doubt her testimony. And this is because she had a long history of alcohol abuse in addition to a long list of mental illnesses. Additionally, Gary was granted legal custody of their son after the divorce. but his wife secretly transferred the boy to a different state. It's also crucial to note that this wasn't the first time some wives contacted the police to report that their husbands might have been responsible for Lisa Ziegert'S death. There were a lot of calls like that, and the police assumed Gary Shara's case was one of them. Despite all these, at a point, Gary was questioned in an interview, but he claimed not to be involved in Lisa's murder and declined to provide a sample of his DNA. The cops effectively had no other choice since no one could lawfully force him to provide his DNA sample. Detectives later gathered the list of all the males who'd been questioned about the crime, but had declined to provide their DNA sample. Gary Shara made it to the list of suspects, and he was repeatedly requested to be brought in for interrogation at the police station. In 2008, during his third interview, Gary Shara tried hard not to touch anything in the room, not even the table in front of him. A bottle of water was provided for him, but he wouldn't touch it. He gave off the impression that his only thought was how to prevent the police from getting a sample of his DNA. In 2017, investigators compiled a list of 11 suspects, including Gary Shara. Each of them had declined to willingly provide a DNA sample after being interviewed at various points throughout the investigation. In reality, there were a lot more suspects on that list, but due to DNA phenotyping, detectives were able to exclude the wrong men. These men didn't fit some of the traits that experts got from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August of 2017, having been refused many times by the suspects on the list to provide their DNA, investigators had no other choice but to compile all available evidence and go to court. They asked the court for an order requiring all the 11 members on the compiled list of suspects to submit their DNA samples, to which the court granted their request. The cops visited Gary's apartment on Lathrop Street at Westfield Spring on September 13, 2017 to inform him of this order. But Gary wasn't at home. His roommate, with whom they shared the apartment, answered the door. The cops gave him their contact address. They also requested that he promptly pass the information to Gary Shara. The following day, an unexpected event took place. Gary Shara's then-girlfriend called the cops and told them that Gary had left 3 letters in her house. To the investigators' surprise, when they opened the letters, Gary Shara had written in details his confession, a last will and testament, and a brief letter of apology to the Ziegert'S family. I've never really been or even felt normal. From a very young age, I was fascinated by abduction and bondage. I could never keep it too far from my mind for long. On that fateful day, I let myself do something terrible, Gary Shara wrote. He stated that although he had no intention of killing Lisa, things had apparently spun out of his hands. Gary claimed that he had numerous opportunities to turn himself into the police, but he could not because he was a coward. He claimed that he had endured years of self-hatred. When concluding the letter, he made his intention to end his life known. The cops immediately began looking for Gary Shara, and soon his car was found in the parking lot of a hospital in Stafford Springs. Another suicide note was placed on the windshield. It was soon discovered that Gary had taken some harmful drugs to kill himself, but he immediately got into his car and drove to the closest hospital, where the drugs were flushed out of his body system. After the doctors were done tending to him, Gary Shara was arrested and taken into custody. A search warrant for both his apartment and that of his girlfriend's was simultaneously issued by a judge. The police discovered numerous items that contained his DNA there. When these items were tested for a DNA sample, it was not surprising that Gary Shara was Lisa Ziegert'S killer because the DNA found on the items in his home 100% matched the DNA sample found on Lisa Ziegert'S body. Aside from this, investigators also had several other potentially important leads. Joyce McDonald Shara, Gary's wife, who had first raised concerns about him in 1993, had sadly passed away in 2014. But investigators were able to locate documents written by her attorney in which the woman provided very disturbing details. One day, Gary had told her bluntly that he wouldn't be able to get intimate with her unless he was holding a knife. The woman called her sister the day after Lisa was killed and revealed that Gary had returned home late that night. She mentioned that his body was covered in scratches and he seemed very disturbed. Additionally, Gary gave his wife a music box and claimed to have purchased it from the same gift and card store where Lisa worked. But according to Gary, it was an older woman who actually sold it to him. The issue is that there had never before been such an employee at the store. It is unclear why the police was not informed about all of these details in 1993, and it is impossible to find out now because the woman who had the information has died. Gary Shara kept declaring his innocence while in custody and refused to admit to his wrongdoings. He most likely acted out of pure fear, but with that much evidence against him, there was no way out for him to get away with his crimes. He only succeeded in delaying his sentence, and that was all. The trial wasn't scheduled to start for another 2 years, but Gary, who had been imprisoned the entire time, decided to confess to his crime. According to Massachusetts law, a defendant facing a first-degree murder charge faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lisa Ziegert'S family and friends were in the courtroom. Her mother, Dee Ziegert, who had hoped for a quarter century to discover the mystery behind her daughter's murder, spoke. She thanked everyone who had been involved in the investigation as well as the regular caring citizens who had helped and supported her family for so long. Today, Lisa got the justice she deserved. Emotional closure will never be achieved. Every family function will always be one short. Every get-together with friends will be one short, said George Ziegert, Lisa's father. Gary Shara was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison as a result of his crimes. Finally, one of the longest-running criminal cases in the state of Massachusetts was eventually resolved and officially closed. What do you think about the Lisa Ziegert'S case being solved? Let's know what your thoughts are in the comments. Thank you and see you in my next video.